den Rechten.
Bir müşteri olan
Den rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
So today I'm going to be talking about everyday practices in cities and how people are really changing their lives because of different issues. So austerity issues, because they can't really survive in cities anymore, or because they have lost their jobs, or because they just financially cannot survive in a city. And also another reason is because of the fact that they want to power down. So let's say if we're looking at John Urry's text on Societies Beyond Oil, he looks at low carbon futures and how people are really sharing resources, figuring out other ways to live in order to power down, not use as much energy as they do, in order to ensure that their future is actually going to be better for their children, etc., etc. So what I want to show today is a little bit of a few of these examples about how people are doing this. And what we study in Hamburg is we study specifically not only the low carbon city and how people are gardening and sharing resources and participating in this collaborative consumption in order to really power down. People are also doing this because they need to live in a more low budget lifestyle. They don't have enough money to, let's say, travel from Hamburg to Berlin, and they need to somehow figure out another way of doing so. So I'm going to show this relationship between these collective mobile practices and urban and digital infrastructure. So my first example is Airbnb. What is Airbnb? It's a short-term rental website, which is an example of various different short-term rental websites that are online, and it allows you to share your room, let's say your tent in your backyard, provide accommodation for somebody else, but you do it for a certain fee. So you become essentially a hotel. And this is becoming very, very popular. There's really millions of people who share their space in, let's say, Berlin, large cities like New York and Hamburg, and they're doing so not only because they want to earn a little bit of money, but oftentimes they need to stay in their home, and they're thinking, how can I do so? Okay, well, I could rent out a room in my house for 2 days, 2 weeks, and then actually stay in the home that I've been living in because my husband has lost his job because of cuts last year, etc., right? So this is one example, and I'm looking at why people are doing this, but also how does this change human interaction? How is it changing interaction between strangers who are coming into your home, and you're doing this because you want to live a more sustainable life in your city? So for me, what's really interesting is really these reconfigurations of how we are social with one another because we need to actually survive in our place that we're living in. So my second example is about the train system in Germany, and that's where I did my main ethnography for the past year. And really what my methods were, I was kind of following travelers and seeing what their problems were with the main train system. And what I've actually heard and I've found out is that the German train system is very expensive for the average traveler. Let's say a trip between Berlin and Hamburg costs 70 euros, and that's way too expensive, not only for students or somebody who doesn't have a job, but for anybody really that has an average job in Germany. So really what is happening is something called ticket sharing. And what ticket sharing is actually a great example of how people reconfigure themselves in order to somehow survive with the regular infrastructure that is the rail system in Germany. And what they're doing is they're taking a ticket that is, let's say for the same journey from Berlin to Hamburg, and there's an offer from the German rail to travel with 5 people for 50 euros on a bit of a longer train. But that journey, of course, will cost you 10 euros instead of 70 euros. And then you're going to be able to get to your destination, right? But then you're not always traveling with 5 people, right? Families don't always just travel together, you're not always traveling with your best friends. So what people are doing is they're standing at train stations and they're looking for people to share the ticket with, right? But there's also another thing that they're using an online platform called carpooling.com. That's the main one that they're using, or their German offshoot of that. And they're finding people who actually take this journey. So on, let's say, carpooling.com, you go online and you check out who's going at what time from Berlin to Hamburg, and they say this journey is perfect, and you see that it shows it's not only a carpool, it's also a train ticket share, and it says I have 4 spots on my train ticket, do you want to meet me at this and this platform and this time? And people are doing this on a really massive scale. So they're using an online platform, but also people who aren't as online savvy or digitally literate, they're actually standing at the train station. And they have special places that they stand at these train stations and special ways of interacting with strangers. Because we have to now think about it here, is that people in their daily routine are now regularly interacting with strangers, and they have to trust these strangers and have to figure out certain ways of actually interacting with them. It's not every day that you just go up to somebody and say, hey, can I travel with you for the next 2 hours, right? But this is something that people are doing to survive. And why? And this is also a question. People aren't doing this only because they're thinking, I want to stop using my car and use the train system and share this travel. They're doing this because they have no other way of really sustainably, financially getting to work, let's say. Or they want to go to their girlfriend every weekend to Berlin, but how do you do this? You have to actually cut down on travel costs because travel is so expensive. So this is really one example of this, and what I've also really noticed is that, first of all, the train station is very, very important. So this, where people stand, is so important. So you have to stand next to a train ticket machine. So there's a specific ticket machines where if you have to catch somebody before they buy their ticket in order to share this ticket with them, right? And this is another thing, is the ticket actually is very, very important. People who are trying to share their ticket, they're often having their ticket out, waving it around, and trying to find others to actually approach them. So often the times the ticket is out and being waved around. And these are some examples of how really the train station, the ticket machine, the ticket itself, the material agency is very, very important. What that means is that actually these material objects are so important in your daily mobile life. They actually are somehow actors in this entire configuration, this assemblage that is happening, that is called the, let's say, low budget travel, right? And another thing that's very important is, of course, the interhuman aspect, and what for me is important, and I also really is inspired by someone named Irving Goffman, who talks a lot about interpersonal interaction in public space, and how we really gesture to each other, how people are looking at each other, how they're looking down if they don't want to talk to one another. And in this configuration, we're constantly observing who's going under what platform, where are they leaving, are we smiling at them, are we not? This is very, very interesting for me too. So what is happening here, there's a very lovely example of something that's called the sharing economy, or the collaborative consumption, where people are using online technologies also in order to share their resources offline. But another thing, so there's few actors. There's the German train system, the Deutsche Bahn, right, who's making these train tickets, and you all the time have to, it's not illegal to do this, of course, but it's a fine line, of course. And you're constantly also thinking about, is this train ticket going to be offered for another half a year? It's the offer of the train system, right? So you're always reliant on the main infrastructure. And then, of course, you have the other very important actor, which is the actual person who buys the main train ticket and actually tries to find others and provides this. They're called the managers in the colloquial term. And then another thing that was very important is the actual place that people are configuring themselves. So it's not just completely arbitrary. The main station is like a stage where people are assembling themselves. And so this is really what I wanted to explain for this example, is that how these kinds of configurations are coming into being, and what is the relationship between this collective mobile practice and urban digital infrastructure. And another important thing that I also wanted to talk about here is that how infrastructure can implement changes that instantly reconfigure this assemblage. People have been taking advantage of this system now, and there's people who are called kind of the mafia colloquial, who buy this ticket and ride around the trains kind of all day. Let's say they buy a ticket between Berlin and Hamburg, and they ride be back and forth, because you could find 5 people in Hamburg, then you find 5 people in Berlin, and you're constantly pocketing that money. So people are taking advantage of also the sharing economy. And people can also then, of course, when people are configuring themselves and helping share the resources, there's also people who can take advantage of this system. But I think that in order to sustain a future of such practices, it's very imperative that those who create this infrastructure observe what grassroots practices are happening and saying, these are the needs of the people right now in cities to travel more cheaply. What can we do? What can we think about in order to change our infrastructure? And this is the question. I'm not criticizing, of course, the German train system, but I think any infrastructure needs to think about what are the needs of the people that are living in this city, and what are the changing needs, right? So we have to think about that imperative as really of needs. So today, really, what I wanted to summarize, I talked about how people are reconfiguring in cities in order to survive, how also they're thinking about others in public space, how trust and strangerhood is being reconfigured, and also what is the role of infrastructure in our public space, in our cities. This is really these 3 questions, and I don't have answers to them, but I think it's important for us to pose these questions and constantly try to find answers really to what's really happening between infrastructure and humans.
In Rechten.